All right, guys, I just brewed myself a cup of coffee, and I'm ready to start some fights with people on the internet. No, I'm just kidding. I'm here to talk about Hults Bruk eliminating the weight stamp from their entire line of axes. And I'm here to talk about Case switching from roll stamping to laser engraving their knives. Now, these are all changes that happened within the last few years. A lot in manufacturing has changed. And this is one area where these companies are adapting or trying to adapt. I'm not exactly sure why they're doing what they're doing, the reasons. One thing I've heard from Hults Bruk is they say we got too many emails about people questioning whether the axes are legitimate or whether they're forgeries because the actual weight of the head is different than what's stamped. Well, I don't know that I really believe that a whole lot. First off, when you get a new axe, you're not going to weigh the head with the handle or pop the head off the handle to weigh the head. I mean, that's just not something that a sane person is going to do. And second of all, if it's a vintage head, big deal, right? It's a vintage head. Somebody sharpened it. Somebody used it. So I don't know that. And granted, I haven't really seen anything official from Hults Bruk that says, yes, this is the reason that we've switched. I think very clearly it's a cost savings measure. And as evidence of that, here we go. Here is the Hults Bruk, and they would call this their premium line or whatever the case may be. And it's got HB made in Sweden, kilograms and freedom units. And then over here we have the Husqvarna axe, the same company. They have hand forged, made in Sweden is the stamping there. Now, I've always had beef with how deep the Husqvarna stamps go. That's over an 1/8 inch down into the metal. And the HB axes and the Husqvarna axes that I have seen break always break like that. They break right along the stamp. So those are just crazy deep. But that Husqvarna axe is considered their budget line. And one thing you'll notice is not on that budget axe is the head weight. So the head weight is one of the things that Hults Bruk used to differentiate their premium line from their standard or branded under somebody else's name axes. And I would say that's just exhibit A in why removing it is cost savings rather than, say any other reason due to quality or the inherent usability of the product. Like you're not getting a better product because there's no head weight stamp. It's just one less thing that the company has to do to get their axes out the door. Now, with Case, I have seen some people say that, well, they're switching to laser engraving, to laser etching. I'm not sure whether you'd call it etching or engraving, if there's an industry term, but they're using a laser. Some people have said, well, the roll stamping introduces some stress or maybe bends the blade. Again, I'm not totally sold on that being the case either. I believe no matter how you spin it to the consumer, it is a cost savings measure, whether that is in no longer needing the stamping equipment, no longer needing to maintain it, or whether it's maybe the lasers are just too cheap to ignore. But I don't believe that this is done out of any benefit to the consumer. And there's a couple of reasons that I think it's a bad thing. Number one, now for Hults Bruk has, since the maybe 90s, maybe early 2000s, really branded itself as a premium axe manufacturer. And along with being a premium axe manufacturer, they have a premium price tag. These axes are darn near $200, in some cases $250. Now, if you are going to charge that much of a premium, you better be prepared to explain why this axe is different than this axe, because this axe through Husqvarna is half the cost, 40% of the cost. They're the same axe. They're the same handle. The exact same thing. There's no difference. So why would you buy the Hults Bruk over the Husqvarna? Well, you'd pay for the Hults Bruk stamp. You'd pay for the extra details. People like those details. If you hang around the axe collecting world, let's see, I've I've got a flint edge here. I've got a true temper. If you find one of these with a weight stamp on the pole, those are super collectible, super sought after. You'd have like maybe a 3-2 is what would be on the pole. Those are really, really collectible. I tell you what, in maybe say 20 years, these Hults Brooks are going to be far more valuable than any new Hults Brook because they have that additional information. You will be able to immediately date whether these axes were made before or after a certain year based on the absence or existence of a headweight stamp. So I feel like Hults Brook is really working against itself because they depend on the value of their axes being high in the secondary market. And when you do something like remove the headweight stamp, all you're doing is reducing the future value of the tools that you sell today, and that reduces the present value of your tools. So that's a mistake, and they say, well, we were getting too many emails about the headweight not matching the stamp, and it's like, well, okay, now you're getting emails about people concerned that your axe head or your axe is a fake because there's no weight stamp on it. So, is it going to save your company that much money by not adding extra information to the left and right of your stamp? I mean, no. Is it easier to probably just, maybe, I don't know. I don't know what they're thinking. I think it's a mistake. I'm trying to come up with reasons why you would do this. It just seems like shooting yourself in the foot. What does it cost you an extra few bucks to add that information on a stamp? I don't know. Either way, I think it's a mistake. I think it's a mistake for Hults Brook. Now, with Case Knives is doing something a little bit different. Now, this is a 1095 steel knife, and I really like the direction that Case is going with their knife steels. 1095 is an excellent steel. There's a reason it's been used for thousands of years. There's a reason that it has been the relied upon dominant mainstay knife steel for at least the last, wow. It's hard to even put an earlier date on 1095 steel because for so long, 1095 steel would be the best that you could possibly create. It would be the steel that you created at first by accident, but then it was so good that you tried to recreate it by, at first making steel was just a very mystical religious experience for a lot of these smaller tribes. There's some evidence that the downfall of the Egyptians during the Bronze Age collapse was due to people groups like the Hittites discovering how to make early versions of steel, because back in the Bronze Age, if you didn't have tin, you couldn't make bronze. And bronze is stronger than most forms of iron, particularly wrought iron. And so these societies that were highly advanced, like the Egyptians, they had international trade networks. It was unbelievable how advanced they were. The Bronze Age was something like 3000 BC to 1000 BC. And so you needed ships and you needed trade networks and you needed people to communicate with all of these other societies, and the Egyptians and the other developed advanced societies of the time, they could make bronze. Well, the Hittites were excluded from that trade network. They were viewed as inferior because they worked with iron, because you can find iron anywhere, but tin is only in a small handful of spots around the world in quantities large enough to result in the Bronze Age. And so only people with those trade networks could have bronze, and if you were excluded from it, you just got dominated in battle. Up until, there's an interesting theory, that the Hittites figured out how to make steel, which meant they figured out how to heat the iron up as hot as you need to in order to allow the carbon to soak into the iron and form that austenite. That's the structure of the steel, because austenite can absorb carbon, and you need carbon in your iron to make steel. Steel is an alloy, carbon and iron. So they were making, we as a human race have been making steel potentially for 3,000 years. I mean, depending on whether you believe that or not. We've been using iron for longer than that, but 3,000 years making steel, and 1095, I believe, is the culmination of 3,000 years of human study making this product, and it's an excellent steel. There's a reason it's used in, I bet if you tallied up the number of knives made today, the majority used steel would be 1095. It's just excellent. And this steel is only going to look better with age. In 50 years, I mean, I've had this knife less than a year, and it's already, I love it. I am just totally a fan of the patina that 1095 steel takes. It's easy to sharpen, and, anyways, I'm kind of rambling, but, I love that Case is going back to 1095 steel. I like their chrome vanadium steel. It's okay. It takes a decent edge. It's a little bit more rust resistant, but I don't mind a little patina. I really don't. So the one thing though is this laser etching or laser engraving. They're still stamping the tangs. And I don't know. This is a 9-dot case, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 dot. Can't quite tell if there's an extra dot there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is an 8-dot case. All right. So there is a date code to that. This is, like I said, this knife is less than a year old, but they have USA 3375 CS for carbon steel. And then over here they have carbon steel. So they have stamped the tangs of all of their knives, and that is the way that it should be. Now, they say they're switching to laser engraving, and I'm very, very wary of that. And they say it's going to be deep and it's not going to be a problem, but one thing I can tell you with a roll stamped tang is this will be, and maybe that's why they switched it over, because you'd have to change up your stamp, add to it or take away, whatever the case may be, every year. Laser engraving, it's just you punch it into the computer. Now, they say that the laser engraving is going to be super deep and it's going to be awesome, and it's not going to be any different. But man, I am just so skeptical of that. I'm so skeptical of that. This roll stamp will be around in 100 years. I don't believe that this knife, under normal use, would patina or corrode enough to make that illegible, and that is going to make this knife desirable in the future. Collectible. Somebody's going to think, wow, that's really cool. Look, you can look up the date that it was made. Anything good has the date that it was made, and I will swear by that until the day that I die. If you buy a Gerber multi-tool, it's not going to have a date on it. That doesn't mean it's a bad tool. It just means it's a tool. When something becomes more than just a tool, that is usually because of some design, some information about the tool. That's the little bit extra. That means, it's more than just a tool, right? Something that you just use and it gets a purpose done, and then you move on with your life. And you can get a little bit sentimental about it, but come on, we're talking about axes and knives. I hope that one day my kids are going to look back on this, or my grandkids are going to look back on this, and they'll say, remember that time we were out deer hunting with Grandpa, and this happened or that happened, and he had this. But like, we arrange our stories as men around the objects that we were working with or using or that were present. I mean, it's a little bit sentimental to say that, I like more information on a tool. It kind of gives me a little bit more of a connection to the tool. But I mean, sorry, that's just the way it is. You go back thousands of years and you look at what Bronze Age and Copper Age people did with their tools. They marked the things that were important to them. So it's absolutely a mistake for Hults Bruk to take their weight stamp off. And I'm very leery of anything that could result in a less legible or less durable tang stamp. I mean, if you think about it, how much money are you really going to save in short-term profits versus potentially ruining the long-term collectability of your brand? I mean, that's not something that I would mess around with without a very good reason. And I'm not saying that there isn't a good reason. It's just I haven't found it yet. You look at these Rough Riders, and I tell you what, there's nothing wrong functionally with this knife. It is excellent in terms of its corrosion resistance. The springs are super snappy. You can hear them. And look at this. We've got a roll stamp. Rough Rider roll stamp. Rough Rider stamp there. Stamp here. And then here we've got, look at what it says. This is kind of funny. It says 440 razor sharp steel, and then it says China with the model number. These Chinese knives, I mean, even these cheapy Chinese knives have the roll stamping. So I am just very, very, very leery of anything that could potentially harm the identification marks on these knives. Now, why do I have Buck here? Well, I have Buck here because, in my view, they do an amazing job with their knives. When I first tried to do this video, I forgot to put my Buck 110 out there because it was on my hip. It's just always on my hip. And about halfway through the video, I thought, why did I not put my Buck 110 in the lineup? And it was like it was a part of me. Like, it's just never off my belt. People say, unless you're, what do they say? Unless you're going to the courthouse or whatever. Like, they've got their Buck 110. And I'm kind of that way too. It's just always there. It's a great knife. It has a really nice weight to it. And one thing you'll notice, USA and the date stamp right there. Every Buck since, probably the 70s. I think in the 60s there's a way to date them, but they really started keeping track of the years a little bit after that. This is my Buck 119, which for me is a newer knife. I've had this maybe 4 years. Maybe 4 years, maybe 5 years. I don't know exactly. You could look up this date right here, and it would tell you exactly when this knife was made. Now, one thing I can tell you is I have had this knife for over 20 years. This is the Buck 105. This dressed my first 3 or 4 deer, and I actually have a scar from that knife right here. These knives, for the guys that have actually dressed deer with these knives, you kind of got to be a little bit artistic because of the back swept tip when you're zippering the hide up to the sternum. And I was in there and I was 12, and it's the first deer that I ever dressed, and it was a big buck. It was a big bodied 4x4 buck. I shot it just as it was going over the hill. I mean, it was like 1 in a million shot. Here I am, I'm 12, and I'm dressing the deer, and I dressed like pheasant and really not much else. And so here we are. We've got a big white-tailed deer, and they're kind of showing me how to go because you put your fingers on the hide so you can raise up the fur to give yourself a little bit of room so this tip doesn't puncture the gut sack, because if you do that, you're making your life a whole lot harder. And so I was zippering up, and then as I'm in there and you're kind of cutting the trachea and you're doing that whole thing, somehow I ended up slicing my middle finger on the back knuckle here, right down to the bone. And so, Buck marked it and it marked me, and here we are. So it's just stuff like that, and Buck put the anvil on every knife that they made in 2002. So, one of these days, wouldn't it be cool to have a 2002 everything? These knives are all in 420 high carbon steel, which I have some thoughts on 420 high carbon steel. I think it gets a bad rap out there because the internet's kind of an echo chamber. And one guy with a sizable channel says something, and then another guy parrots it, and then another guy parrots it because you heard 2 guys say it, and now you're in an echo chamber. But with that said, check out my channel. I feel like I can be very truthful in fairly evaluating a product and a tool and things like that. I'm certainly no Buck, fanboy. But I do really give Buck props for what they do. These stamps are amazing. Nobody that I've talked to has or read about, has even whispered about changing the way that they stamp. Now, one thing that I think is really cool, look at how the stamp on this buck on the right is different than the buck on the left. This is a little bit more shallow. Just little things like that. With a laser, everything's the same. But look, you can tell this is 2002. Here we go. That's different. So something at some point changed. I've had this knife 10 years. 10 years ago this year, I've had this knife. I'm almost positive I got it in 2015. And you look at the stamping there, it's actually a little bit more similar to this buck. And that's the stuff that I think makes a knife interesting. Hey, look at the stamp there. It's different than that stamp, and they changed this up, and they changed that up. And I just hate this attempt to standardize everything, to make everything just a homogeneous blob, and knives and tools have been one area that has resisted that for so long. Nobody would design a knife that looks like this. There's a reason this is in every Hollywood movie that needs to portray a big knife. The Buck 119 is just a classic. There will never be another knife like it. It's incredible. The Buck 110, again, oh my goodness, like this heavy brass bolsters. Goodness, this is a phenomenal knife. And I have a 440 high carbon steel buck. I think it's from the late 70s on the way. And I think 1981, buck changed to a special kind of steel. I think 425M is what they call it. I can't remember. And then after that, they switched in the 90s to 420 high carbon steel. So Buck has really only used 3 versions of steel in the last half century. I mean, pretty amazing when you think about it. This brass right here, it's actually not a bolster. It goes all the way around the knife. Now, I believe at one point these were bolsters. There were brass bolsters that were pinned in place. So I'm really curious to see that new knife, the new old knife, and you can still get a 440 high carbon steel Buck 110 for about $40 or $50. And so I'm really excited for that. But that's what makes these knives collectible. It's what makes them special. It's the little variations. And when you leave stuff like the head weight off, it's just, every year I'm gonna go off into the woods here. But every year the scientists come out and they can't wait to show us what information they found that proves we're nothing but animals and we're no more differentiated from the things that crawled out of the primordial soup a billion years ago. Whatever the case may be. And for a while it was, we're the only people that use language. And then, our definition of language kind of expanded a little bit. And it's, we're the only ones that use tools. And it's like, some chimpanzees off the Ivory Coast or in Zimbabwe or the Congo or whatever, we saw them, using tools. And it's like, were they using tools or were they keeping tools? I mean, to me, there's a difference there. There's a difference between chimpanzees using a rock to accomplish a purpose. It's just thoughtless. It's rough. It's just you use it to accomplish a task and then you throw the rock back into the woods, or you use a stick for this or that to poke something or collect some ants. Whatever the case may be, you use a stick and then you dispose of the stick. I've never seen anywhere anybody even imply that any member of the animal kingdom uses a tool and keeps it around. They don't mark their tools. When you put a maker's mark, you're saying, this is who made it. I'm Hults Brook. This is where it was made in Sweden. You're saying this is the head weight. This is information about the tool. That's what makes it differentiated from all other tools. It's like, this is my rifle. There are many like it, but this one's mine. I mean, it's something more than that. You've marked it. We have marked our tools for 10,000 years, and taking information off of the markings, to me, is a step back, and it's something that's going to hurt the secondary market. It's going to hurt collector interest in the tools, and that's one thing that, man, I tell you what I love about Buck. They've always had the dates, they've always had the model numbers, and it's always been stamped. It's there, and it's enduring. So I would just ask that Case, if they do determine that the laser engraving, it isn't as durable, I know that this stamp in 100 years is still going to be there, that they would go back to roll stamping. I don't think that roll stamping has any mechanical problems. It doesn't add any mechanical issues to the steel. I mean, people say it bends it, and it's like, well, I don't know. I mean, I feel like it can be done very, very well and carefully, and it has been done for decades and decades now. For Hults Brook, I'm not... Man, I'm not crazy about the direction the company seems to be going in. And so I would just really, advise that they add those identifiers back into their axe, put the head weight back on. It even makes it harder to buy an axe, because a lot of their new axes, they frankly just look the same. They take an axe, same pattern, and they make it light, and they make one heavy. So even purchasing an axe online, if you see this online, it's boom, that's £1.25. They could make a 2.5 pound and a 3 pound, and the head weight's right there. If there's no weight stamp on it, you really don't know what you're buying unless you're doing it in person. So anyways, I just wanted to put that out there. And these are my opinions. They are only my opinions. And I said what I said. So, all right, guys, let me know your thoughts, and I'll catch you on the next one.